All right, so we learned how to graph absolute value functions, but now we're going to learn how to write equations given words and given a graph. So know the equation of absolute value is y equals absolute value of x, and so we're going to see how we are changing our equations. So the first one goes shift of 1 unit to the right, okay? So we are going to start with y equals, and you have your absolute value of x. Okay, if it goes to the right, that means it's going to happen within these absolute value bars. And remember, if it happens within the absolute value bars, it's the opposite of what you think. So you would think 1 to the right is a +1, but in this case, it's actually a -1. Okay, lastly, it says to move up 2, and we know that up 2 is going to go on the outside of your absolute value bar. Okay. And it didn't tell us anything else about the slope or opening up or down. So this would be our final equation. So y equals absolute value of x minus 1 plus 2. Okay, so why don't you try B on your own? Press pause, and then we will go over the answer. All right, so in part B, 3 units to the left. So instead of going -3, it actually means go +3. So it should be x plus 3 inside the absolute value bar. And again, 7 units down would mean a -7 on the end, okay? On part C, a vertical shrink is going to mean it's skinny. So it's going to be skinnier. So that's going to change your slope on the outside. So with your equation, you're going to have your absolute value of x, but the factor of 1/3 will go on the outside, okay? So your equation would just be y equals 1/3 x. In part D, if it says vertical stretch, that is meaning it's going to get wider. So again, that number is going to go on the outside of your equation. So you would have 3, and then you would have absolute value of x. Okay, so if it changes the way it opens or the slope, you're going to put a number on the outside. And if it's changing left or right, it goes on the inside, and up or down goes on the outside. And that's how you write an equation from words. So now we're going to look at writing equations from graphs. So the directions say, write the equation of the absolute value graphs below and state the domain and range. So first we're going to write the equation. And when you write an equation, you need the slope, and then you need the horizontal and vertical shift. Okay, so you need to see how far it went left or right, how far it went up or down, and your slope. Okay, so first off, here's our vertex. And so your vertex was at a -2, -4. So one way you could do it is to write the equation using the vertex and start with y equals absolute value of x is going to go in the middle. Now remember, if it's a -2, it's actually going to be a +2 inside the absolute value bar. And then that -4 is going to go on the outside. Okay, so probably the easiest way is to find your vertex, and the only thing to remember is your x value does switch when you write the equation, because +2 really means -2, which means left 2. The last thing is to find your slope. So I can see that this graph is just going up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1. So I actually don't need a number out front. If you wanted to put a 1, you could, but otherwise that's it. Also, let's talk about domain and range. So domain is always going to be one thing, and it's always going to be all real numbers, because you hit an arrow coming from the left side and you hit an arrow coming from the right side. So remember, how we write that is an R with a line through it, or you could write out all real numbers. So again, domain is always going to be all real numbers. It's not going to change. Now the range, it's always going to start with the letter y, because range deals with the y-axis. It's always going to be this y part of your vertex, okay? So it's always going to be the lowest or the highest. So in this case, you can either look at the graph and see that the lowest it went was a -4, or you could always look at the y part of your vertex. The thing that goes in the between is going to be a greater than or a less than equal to sign, and that depends on how it opens. So if it's opening up, you are going to have a greater than or equal to, and if it opens down, you're going to have a less than or equal to. Okay, so pretty straightforward with that. So in this case, our graph is opening up, so I'm going to have greater than or equal to -4. Okay, so that's how you find domain and range and write the equations. So why don't you try this one on your own, and then we'll go over it, so press pause. In this problem, first thing I did was I found my vertex, which was at a -3, +4. So then when I started to write my equation, I ignored this right now, and I wrote x plus 3 because you changed the sign, and then I brought down my y value of 4. I noticed that this graph was opening down, so I went ahead and put a negative out front, and then I saw that it was down 1 over 1, down 1 over 1, so it's assumed that there's a 1 out front. Again, domain is always all real numbers. And then for the range, I put my y value, the number 4, because that's the highest the graph went, the vertex, and then I put less than or equal to because the graph opened down. Okay. All right, let's try a little bit harder one with some slope involved. So if you turn it on the next page, same thing, I need to write the equation of the absolute value graph and then state the domain and range. So I'm going to do the first one with you guys. So here's your vertex. Notice that there is no x value, so that would be 0, and then it went down 1, so -1. So when we write our equation, I'm going to start with my absolute value, x, and then actually it's like plus 0 because there was no x value, so that's the same as just absolute value of x by itself in the bars, and then you would just put that -1 on the outside. Okay, so this graph is saying, hey, it shifted down 1. Next thing is to find the slope. And again, they went down 1 over 1. So all I need to do is put a negative out front to represent its opening down. And then our equation's done. So domain is going to be all real numbers. And then range would be y. And then the y part of your vertex was a -1. And it's opening down. So it's less than or equal to it. Okay. All right, so why don't you try this last graph on your own? Press pause, and we will go over it. All right, so on this last one, my vertex was at a -3, -1. And so when I wrote this part of my equation, again, the negative becomes a positive for the x value, and then you take on your y value. I knew it was opening up, so I knew it was positive, but I found that it was going up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1, so that means there's a 2 on the outside. Okay, the domain is always all real numbers, and then for the range, it was greater than or equal to because the graph is opening up, and then again, the lowest point is your y part of your vertex of a -1. Okay, so that's how you write the equations of absolute values. All right, one more thing on evaluating, and the cool thing is we can do this in our calculator. So I'll teach you these steps in a second, but when you evaluate, all you are doing is replacing the value they want inside everywhere where you see the letter. So I would start off with a negative, and then it wants me to put the value of t inside the absolute value. So I would put -2 inside the absolute value and add a 5. Okay. So if we know, if we want to do this in our head, taking the absolute value of something makes it positive because it's asking how far away is it from 0. So in this case, absolute value of -2 is a +2. And then you would bring down the +5 and then bring down that negative sign. And then -2 plus 5 is a 3. Okay? So that's how you can do it if you were to do it in your head. But let me teach you how to do it in the calculator. So if you will get your calculators out, the first thing you do is you press math. If my calculator will come up. Okay, so how you get the absolute value bars, it's under this green button called math. So if you hit math and you have to scroll over using this right arrow key to number up here. So if you scroll to number, ABS stands for absolute value. So if you ever want absolute value to come up in the calculator, you would hit that. And luckily, on your calculator, it's updated, and it will just look like that on your calculator. But mine does have parentheses, okay? But all you would do, for example, is I would type negative for this negative out here, and then I want to bring up my absolute value bars by hitting math over enter. I would type in what is in the absolute value bars, and then I would continue to add 5, and like we did in our head, we would get 3. Okay. Alright, so that is how you type it in a calculator. So why don't we, I'm going to try 2 with you, actually I'll try 3 with you, and then I'll leave you to try 2 and 3 on your, or 2 and 4 on your own. So the first thing is I'm going to input a 3 right into that x value. So I'm going to have this 3 on the outside of the absolute value bars. I'm going to have -2, and I'm going to substitute in 3 for x. And then I would add 4 and close the absolute value bar, -9. Okay, so if I were to do this in my head, order of operations tells me I should multiply first. So 2 times -3 is -6, and then bring down everything in our expression. -6 plus 4 is -2. The absolute value of -2 is a +2. 3 times 2 is 6, and 6 minus 9 is -3. So if I love math so much, which I do, and I want to do it in my head, that's how you would do it in your head. But let's try typing it in the calculator. Alright, so the first thing you would have to do is bring up this 3 on the outside of the absolute value bars, and then you want the absolute value bars to come up. So you press math, right, enter. And again, yours will actually have the absolute value bars, unlike mine. Plug in 3, add 4, and then I will close my absolute value bars, but again, yours will be closed. You can scroll over outside your absolute value bars with that right arrow, and then hit subtract 9. And we do get -3. Okay, so why don't you try 2 and 4 on your own, and then we will go over the answers. Alright, so for number 2, I got 6. Again, I did it in my head because I love math, but you could have typed it in the calculator too. Again, on number 4, I got 34. So let me know if you have a question. But that is how you evaluate absolute value. And thanks for watching.